Hello and welcome to Coffee and Comebacks. Today we're joined by Will Fraser. Will's a former professional rugby player, and Will and I first met when I was attending a corporate day at Saracens Way. At that point, Will had recently retired from rugby. That's the right word. I know Serena Williams doesn't like to use that word. So transitioning, and we'll definitely touch on some of the transitioning today in terms of moving into the commercial environment. But we're really going to focus on some of the challenges and achievements that you face, Will, in both your career, your personal life, and now in the professional commercial environment, running your own business 101st. So over to you, Will, and it'd be great for you to tell us about who you are.
No worries. Well, firstly, thank you very much for having me on. Very much looking forward to the next hour or so. As you said, I used to be a professional rugby. I always say in a former life, because it does feel like a former life now. Professional played for Saracens. I joined the club when I was 14. I was actually born in Watford General Hospital, which is literally 50 yards from Vicarage Road, which was Sarri Stadium at the time. So it's kind of as local can be. So I joined at 14, got my first contract out of school, and then was really fortunate to play through to 27, where unfortunately my career was ended by a neck injury. But I was able to play with, in the period of the club's time where won numerous European Cups and Premierships, and play with some of the lads that are still knocking about, some of the best players in the game currently. I'll caveat by saying I probably had very little to do with the success. It was more right place, right time. I was kind of there for the journey. Did that, and then now I'd say we met when I finished playing, and I got the opportunity to run a business unit out at the club, which was the Saracens Way, and now start my own business in the middle of COVID, which I'm sure we'll touch on. I'm not sure what else is. Got a little girl, Evie, 18 months, obviously my wife Sean, number 2 on the way. So it's life has very much progressed since I finished playing rugby.
Yeah, excited. I remember when we had one of our meetings, it was last year actually, I think I was sat in a sling after my bike accident. You're about to go and have your hip replacement. This is not a good not a good promo for doing lots of sport. Not that I ever reached the elite level that you did, but and Evie was sat on your lap, and you were like, I hope you don't mind, I've got my daughter sat on my lap because Sean's at work. And I just thought, oh, this is so refreshing.
That's a nice thing out of COVID is I think we've all learned a lot more about everyone's personal lives and situations, because you have to sometimes, I've been on loads of calls where a dog's barking in the background, my dog's barking in the background, or kids are running, and it just sparks new conversations, right? When you just learn more about each other. So that's been a lovely kind of silver lining to it all.
Yeah, although I don't know about you, but when COVID first hit and there were obviously I was still in the corporate environment at the time, but I'd be on lots of Zoom calls, in fact, way too many Zoom calls. Thankfully, the ones I do now through choice, I really enjoy them. But, you'd be on those Zoom calls and a little noise or a child coming in. I used to get really stressed out. You cannot come in, signs on the door, mummy's working. And now I'm like, wow, we're all used to it.
Yeah, this is it. New world.
New world. And speaking of new world, so do you want to give us a bit of insight in terms of your journey as a player? Because you touched on injuries briefly, and one of the things that we love to do on Coffee and Comebacks is really focus in on some key challenges and key lessons. So maybe starting with sport and how you've taken that through into your life and your family and your business. What was your journey like in terms of your progress?
So my rugby career was, I probably spent more time under general anaesthetic than I actually did on the pitch. So one of my kind of nicknames at the club was the building, because I was kind of held up by scaffolding. So it was, I think I finished my career with 10 operations. So from 18 to 27, it's almost one operation a year, with various other, muscle tears and bits and bobs along the way as well. And I kind of categorize them in 2 halves, if you like. So when I started my career, any injury, however big or small, would be the end of the world. It would be this kind of major catastrophe, whether it was a little broken finger or, a knee operation. It had the same impact, which when I look at it now, seems mental. But that was because my whole thing was I wanted to play. I wanted to impress. I wanted to get in the first team. And anything that stopped me doing that, even if it was just for a week, was devastating. I didn't really deal with it very well. So the irony in that is the one thing I want to do is get back on the pitch. But the one thing I was stopping myself from doing was getting back on the pitch, because I wasn't handling the situation. I wasn't accepting it, and I wasn't able to start my rehab and start my recovery as quickly as I could have if I'd just been able to get my head around it. And then my perception of those things kind of changed with my brother Henry's accident. And then after that, it was a complete opposite, whereby, and to no kind of conscious thing, it was more this subconscious change that I think me, my whole family, anyone close to us had gone through as a result of Henry's accident. The way he dealt with it was just this, right, this is what it is. You know, it's just no one's fault. I play contact sport. These things happen. And I was able to kind of get on that recovery journey a lot quicker. And I knew myself a lot more. So early on, I didn't really know myself very well and how I dealt and how I handled things. Whereas off the back of that, you kind of open yourself up in many ways. And I learned that what I needed to do to accept that particular situation of injury was I needed to get everything out. So I'd go to the surgeon, they'd say, right, you're having an ankle op, you're going to be out for 4 months, whatever it is. I'd go, okay, cool, no dramas. I'd probably sit in quiet the whole car journey home with the physio. I'd get home, I'd lock myself in the room, I'd have a cry, punch a few pillows, have a few screams, and then that was it. I was done. Get out of the system. What do I need to do now? And then very much this kind of mindset of, well, how do I make sure that when I do come back playing, I'm a better version of me than I was when I got injured? And that was kind of my whole outlook. So that was, my rugby career is very much like that, you know, if you're going to put it on a graph. But it taught me a huge amount about me, which is what I've been able to kind of take forward when talk about dogs barking. There you go.
There we go. Set it right up, didn't we?
Gosh, yeah. Yeah, so it's taught me a huge amount about myself, which to be honest has been invaluable in numerous ways, whether it's starting the new business, whether it was actually coming out of rugby into the real world to begin with. You know, I couldn't have been more clueless about everything to do with business and commercials and that sort of thing. And even becoming a dad now, you know, it's probably the mother of cliches, but when you become a parent, you know, everything changes. So so my rugby career, as much as I would have loved to still be playing, I look at my close mates that are still playing, and there's always a bit in the back of my head that thinks I should still be there. You know, I'm only 32. My plan was to finish about 35, which obviously I fell well short of. So I do get that, but then equally, the bigger part of me looks back and goes, well, actually, if my career hadn't been the way it was, I wouldn't have the outlook on life that I have now. I wouldn't behave the way I behave now. I wouldn't be trying to do the things that I'm trying to do. And in many ways, it's given me a massive leg up, because that transition is difficult. I was able to make that transition young enough to get myself on the ladder. So hopefully when the other lads finish, I could potentially offer a hand to them, whether it's actually giving them a job, whether it's kind of connecting them with people that I know. So I think it all feeds back. But yeah, it taught me loads, my rugby career.
Yeah, and it's the resilience piece that I think you really draw on there, isn't it? When you talk about that, I've spoken about it before on other conversations where we talk about that resilience muscle. And actually, I was listening to another podcast recently. In fact, don't mind plugging it on here because it is absolutely brilliant. High performance podcast. They've always got brilliant guests on there. And, you know, I think it was Gary Lineker that was saying that a lot of sport and life, obviously, also comes down to luck. So you might be really lucky that you just don't really, I mean, he never got injured, for example, whereas your luck didn't go that way, but it's about then how you deal with it. And it's the resilience that's built through those situations where, you know, they're discussing all of that. And you talked about acceptance and Henry, and one of the things that I've pulled out when I've looked at, maybe if you're happy to touch on Henry's story. I know we're going to hopefully speak to Henry on another podcast as well.
I've spoken about him enough, it's fine. Yeah.
yeah, you're like, but that's the thing that he talks about a lot, isn't it? Is acceptance. It's literally accepting where you are and then being able to build a plan from that. Until you accept it, you just can't progress.
Definitely. And I think resilience is a really interesting topic, because in the work we do now with my own business, resilience is obviously, particularly coming out of the pandemic, is a huge theme that people want to talk about and explore and discover. And I think there's a massive misnomer around it where people just think you either are or you aren't resilient, like it's a genetic thing, or that you can just happen. So people will go through life be extremely successful. I mean, sport's a great example of a lot of these things. You get sports teams or individuals that will be very successful over a period of time, and suddenly one bad thing happens and they kind of disappear. They don't come back from it. Whereas you have other players and teams that will be very up and down, but they're the ones that sustainably kind of get to the end goal. And a lot of times, because resilience is learned, it's a learned behavior. And I think you can't be, I won't use the language, you can't be resilient unless you've gone through some bad times. It's not possible. You know, if you've only ever dealt with success, you're not going to necessarily be that resilient. You've not had to deal with any form of adversity. And I think that's where, when I talk about it with myself, that's the massive thing I gained from the injuries, was I had to learn to go through them and to get through them. And you know, and there's been stuff that's happened post my rugby career and post Henry's accident, even personally with my immediate family, where we've had to really kind of dig into the reserves to get through some bits. But what you naturally subconsciously go back to is past experiences. And it's not a case of going, well, I dealt with that, therefore I should deal with this. It's your mind just naturally goes back to the mindset and the mechanisms and the way of thinking and philosophies that will then pull you through. You just reframe them in a different. So Henry's bit was really interesting because he had to teach himself that, you know, in that moment of having his accident.
How old was Henry when he had the accident?
17.
17,
so
yeah. So
he's young. And you know, as a family, we'd all had our own mini ups and downs. We all wanted to play sport and do various bits and bobs, you know, but nothing on the level of, you know, what we had to deal with Henry's accident. And so we all had to teach ourselves. That's why I said, you know, at the start, it opened us up, and we by, you know, indirectly, almost accidentally, learn a huge amount more about each other and ourselves, because you're forced to in a situation like that. And I think Henry talks about this moment. It's probably, I'm trying to think how long into the journey it was. It's maybe like 3-4 months after his accident, when he first got in his wheelchair and outside the hospital, or to leave the hospital with these kind of glass sliding doors. And it was the first time since the accident he'd seen a reflection of himself, and he'd lost 4 stone. You know, before he was this kind of, I can say it, I wouldn't say it to him at the time, but I can say it now. He was kind of this strapping young lad who was very strong and loved the gym and all the rest of it. I think he'd lost 4 stone. You know, he was in a wheelchair with a headrest because he couldn't support his own head, and all, you know, just like a different person. And he always says that night he didn't sleep at all. He just cried the entire night. But then the following day, it was kind of like a why me? Why is this? But then the following day, it was like, I needed that night and I needed that experience, because now I've come out the other side of it and go, well, it's no one's fault that this happened. It's just unfortunate that it's happened to me. It's not like someone pushed me or someone put that sandbag there. It's just one of those things, you know. So actually, if I want to make the most of my life now, I've got to accept this as just what it is. And it's that mentality and that way of thinking, I think, had kind of a monumental subconscious impact on all of us. And I think my family are maybe go too far, because also you can be kind of too problem solving and too positive sometimes, you know, when you talk to other people. But I think we're now very much that pragmatic kind of, right, this is the situation, it is what it is, what do we do next? But yeah, it's huge. And it's, as I say, it's a journey for everyone. It doesn't happen in 3-4 months like it did with H. It doesn't happen in, you know, best part of 15 years it does for me. It can happen in a day, it can happen in a lifetime. You know, it's very unique to individuals. But I think the important thing with it is actually, once you've gone through something, is having that moment of reflection. And it's not being really formal with it and sitting down with a pen and paper and necessarily going, on day 1 I thought this, on day 7 I thought this. But it's just having that reflection of your own self and going, well, you know, how do I think now? Like, what is my perspective on these things now? Because I think that's then what takes you forward if something bad, well, not if, inevitably when adversity comes around again, because it always does at some point. It's just, it varies in the level of severity.
Yeah, there's 2 things that I really want to draw on there. One is that getting stuck in the fault and blame piece, which I'm sure we've all been guilty of, that piece around why me, or it was there, and you literally get stuck on who to blame, or blaming somebody about fault, rather than just going, right, okay, this has happened, this is about taking, but even if it was out of my control, I've now got to take responsibility, because I'm the only one that can take responsibility for what happens next. And as soon as you can do that, as hard as it can be, because it's almost like going, if I take responsibility, I'm taking the blame. It's not about blame. I think so many people can get stuck in that space of fault, blame. This is so tough. Did you see much of that in sport, or would you say that actually people at that level had already learned to go beyond that?
It's a good question. I think you to a degree you do, but it's very contextual. So I think if you saw it, when you would see it would be if people had prolonged injuries or regular injuries, because then that's naturally go, well, why is player X able to play 10 years without as much as a bang knee, and I've had all these injuries, and we're doing all the same training, we're doing all the same. So that's when it would manifest itself, if it did. But you didn't. I think at that level, you're right. You kind of, to get to that point, you kind of acquire a certain level of resilience and ability to deal with bits anyway. But where you see it more, to be honest, is the work I do now in corporate life or in public life or whatever it is. You see it all the time. But because people haven't had those, and this is the beautiful thing about sport, is sport exposes you to extremes, whether it's extreme pressure or extreme adversity or extreme success. There's no middle ground with sport. It's you're here or you're here type thing.
You're in the team, you're not in the team. You're injured, you're not injured. You win, you lose. It's binary, isn't it?
And it's quick turnarounds. So one week you're out of the team, you have to manage that, and then the next week you could be back in the team. One week you lose a game, you've got to deal with it, because next week you've got another game coming up. And finals as well. You go all the way through the season, get to a final, and we did it where we got to the European and Premiership final, which were on back-to-back weekends, and we lost both of them. And then then you're straight into the off seasons. You don't even have a chance to pick yourself up. Then you're into, so you have to wait best part of 3 months before you can play your next game to kind of, almost perform a bit of an exorcism on yourself to kind of get rid of the demons of the finals. But so you have to manage it. So whereas in other walks of life, you don't, especially in business, it's not a weekly thing, it's an annual thing, or it might be a monthly, so you don't get that ability or the opportunity to have the quick turnaround. Because a lot of the time, a lot of the ways that we think and behave actually are governed by external influences. The only reason we were forced to think quickly and react quickly and adapt quickly because we had a game in 7 days. Sometimes a game in 5 days. So if we didn't, then whereas in other walks of life, you're not forced to. Therefore, you kind of go, well, why would you think otherwise? Because all you've known is this. But what's really the biggest, I suppose, context you see it in is actually when you have done something wrong. So if it is your fault, is then the inability to actually kind of own that and apologize. You see it especially on big corporate levels from a business point of view. Even at the moment, cost of living crisis and we won't go into it because that's a whole nother podcast, but in politics and all these other areas, people massively undervalue someone just fessing up and going, I'm sorry, it's my fault, I'll own this, but what we're going to do going forward is this, rather than shooing it onto someone else. Or that's where the blame game gets played, is when you're deflecting. And it's really difficult, right? Whether it's owning up to something yourself or whether it's getting out this kind of why me mentality, it's a really difficult thing to do. To be able to take that level of accountability on your own shoulders is really tough. Like, I think people, certainly I get in situations where I underestimate how tough it is because I've had extreme experiences to be able to, and like, so I'm going to caveat all this now. I don't want people to listen to this thinking that like I deal with, because I don't, it's always, every day's a school day and all those cliches. So, I get stuff wrong all the time, but the important thing is knowing when you got it wrong and then figuring out, well, how do I not get it as wrong next time? And that kind of way of thinking.
Yeah, and it's interesting because we'll definitely come on to that when we talk about the business side of things around culture, because it's about that. Do you have a blame culture? For example, I've been in teams and businesses where there's definitely been a blame culture. And if something goes wrong, the first thing they're looking for is who's to blame. And actually, sometimes that person to blame could be the scapegoat. And what they deal with is the blame rather than actually the root cause problem or what the outcome is or whatever it might be. And it's that that whole blame culture. Whereas, you know, if you're in a culture where actually the leader of the team or the team ethos is that we own up to our mistakes, and if you own up to your mistakes, actually it's not that bad. Because I think it's a bit like a muscle, don't you think, where once you've owned up to something and then you go, oh, it wasn't actually that bad, and it made the outcome better, you go, oh, okay, well, I'm going to own up next time, and actually it made it better. Whereas if you don't, you've always got that fear of what's going to happen if I own it. So it's a bit like resilience: learn it, experience it, swallow the bitter pill, but own up.
Yeah, and it's like a lot of things in life, the thought of it is worse than the actual thing. And I think you're right. Is once you've done something the first time and you realise, okay, that was never near as bad as I thought it was going to be, you're much more likely to do it again. And I think a lot of the time, when going to your point of kind of teams and culture, again, using sport as a great example, if a team loses, or let's say a player makes a mistake on the pitch, how often do you see the manager on the TV interviews single out that one player or that one issue? Or do you usually see them go, no, it's actually probably our fault because we didn't look at this during the week, or we didn't, and almost take the blame away and take the pressure off? And actually, you don't see that as much in kind of the corporate world and public life, but the few cases you do, the value that gives to the team is enormous. You know, the ability for someone to go, look, this has happened, it's fine, don't worry about it, because actually, and also it's how you frame mistakes. You know, and I don't necessarily like using the word failures, because a failure by definition means that you can't then make it right because you failed, when actually mistakes are fine, because mistakes has happened, but that's the best learning tool you can ever have in life. That's why resilience comes from adversity. They're the best learning tools you can ever have. And I think it's how you frame it. If you frame a mistake as we're coming down like a ton of bricks, what you get is people who actually go within themselves, who don't want to try something new because of fear of getting it wrong. Whereas if you say, actually, mistakes are great because we learn from them, as long as we learn from them, that's when you get all your new ideas and your innovation and your creativity. And that's when you get these amazing things that happen. So I think that framing of it is often then what dictates whether it's a blame culture or not. And that's very much driven by your top echelons of an organisation or a team, whether it's sport or business.
Yeah, that is such a great point and so true. And I've always said, and I say it with the children, and we'll come on to that parenting piece in a moment, actually, because I think that's quite an interesting thing to touch on. But I would say it's only a mistake if you do it twice, because, you know, there's no way that we can go through life and not do things that, looking back, oh, okay, we could have done that better, or I said the wrong thing, I did the wrong thing. You know, that is just, we're human beings. But actually, as if you continue to do it, then it's a mistake, and then actually that is where there's an issue. Whereas, you know, we just wouldn't be humans if we weren't continually making mistakes, or that, you know, whatever term you want to put around it. So I think that's a really important point you make there.
100%. And you don't, this sounds like a ridiculously obvious thing to say, but you don't know what you don't know until you realise, Christ, I didn't know that. You know, and you look at, and we won't go into, but you look at kind of wider societal issues, you know, things even around language. If you've been brought up in an environment, in a household where you've only heard your parents or people you respect and love and trust talk a certain way, then of course you're more likely to talk that way as well. The issue comes if you're educated and told you shouldn't say this because X, Y, and Z. If you then still decide to carry on talking that way, that's when you're an ignorant what's this, and that's when that's an issue. But actually, if you listen to that education, you take it on board and you start to change the way you talk, then that's a good thing, right? That can only be a good thing. And I think going to wider bits, too often in life, we don't, being able to make that distinction, I think we struggle with. And that actually, we do a lot of work with our foundation in prisons, which is why I kind of get a bit passionate about this stuff. And actually, there are obviously complete wrong-uns in there that have had great upbringings and consciously made decisions to do what they've done. But actually, the majority of people in there are there very much for environmental and circumstantial reasons. They've grown up selling drugs to their parents. Their brothers have taught them how to cook crack in microwaves when they were 13 years old. So you go, well, of course you ended up in a gang selling drugs. That's all you knew. Their whole morality of life is governed. We use the analogy of, you know, have you ever been to a restaurant on a recommendation of a friend and you end up having a bad meal? Have you ever gone to a gig or put a tenner on a horse because someone gave you a tip, like your dad, but you lost it? right? We've all done those things, and we've done them because the people that have told us to do them, we've trusted. Now, the worst thing that happens is we have a bad meal or we lose £10. It's not really the end of the world. For these young kids, they're being told to sell this item on the corner because they've been told that by someone they trust. Unfortunately, the end result for them, or the worst result, is that they get nicked and end up in jail. But the mechanism is exactly the same. It's just they're in an environment where the people they trust are the wrong people. So it's kind of going, well, actually, if we can give these people, help them, give them a leg up so they don't do that again when they come out, then that's only a good thing. And I'm pretty sure I've gone on a huge tangent here, but you can apply it to a lot. I think you can apply it to a lot of bigger, wider kind of societal issues where actually it's not about necessarily what someone's like. It's about whether or not you give them the education and then what they decide to do. If they decide to crack on as they were, then you go, right, well, you do you, and you're going to end up where you end up. If they take it on board and change, then that can only be a good thing for the rest of us.
Yeah, and actually, I'm glad you talked about that, and it'd be great if we can go on at some point to delve into more about what you're doing with the foundation. I know you recently did a challenge to raise some more money for that, and I think it links back to that parenting piece as well. And I know you were one of 4 boys. You were the second boy. I was talking to you about this before we came onto the call, and sort of saying, I remember when you told me that you'd been it's that whole thing of you get passed down the rugby boots until you got to the point where you were the one that was always, had the bigger feet or whatever. And I've got 4 kids, 2 are stepchildren, 2 are my children, and the 2 stepchildren are teenagers. And one of the things we battle with, and you're probably not in that space yet with young Evie, who's would never answer back and an absolute delight and all those things. But when you get to the years of
use that was a massive thunder. That
was it? Oh, the thunder.
Thunder,
yeah. Blimey, no, definitely not your fault. There's no blame.
No, exactly. Except it's happened. Move on.
Exactly. But yeah, so when you go back to teen and you're trying to say to them, look, firstly, I think there's 2 things. One, how do we as parents not do that? I think the term's helicopter parenting, where we're trying to remove all the obstacles, make schools saying, oh, we don't want to make it competitive and we don't want to be upfront with them. No, tell them if they're not working hard enough. They need to win or lose. They need to, obviously that's my opinion, and I know not everybody subscribes to that opinion, but if children go through their childhood and we've removed all those obstacles, and as parents we're not letting them make those mistakes and learn, then how do they do that? And then also as they move in, through their lives and they're making decisions, that sort of value piece that you spoke about, where if they've grown up in an environment, or an environment at school is causing them to behave a certain way, or their peers or whatever it might be, how much do we take that into consideration? Because I'm sure we're all judgmental at times of course, and how much do we attribute it to learning and then building resilience and go, okay, I'm going to move on and learn from that. Do you sort of relate to that, even as a parent as young children and as a son and brother?
Yeah, no, massively. And I think it's it's really interesting because me and my brothers we talk about these things quite a lot. So I'm the first one to have kids, and so obviously they asked me quite a few bits, but we had an unbelievable upbringing as kids. We couldn't have wanted for any more. We got awesome parents, and we all get along really well. We went to good schools, had a nice house, all the rest of it. We were unbelievably fortunate. But I think through our own individual experiences, we come to realize that now. And I think actually if I'd known that as a kid, and my parents tried to harp it into us all the time, kids are kids, and going back to a point where because we never really necessarily got exposed to anything else. So, and I think that's a big thing I want with Evie and child number 2 when they come along, when the time's right and they're of an age to kind of understand, it is exposing them to other, because touch wood, hopefully we can give them as good an upbringing as we possibly can from every possible aspect. But for example, I've said to Sean, and we said when they're old enough, I want to take them into the prison that we work in with the foundation, and actually let them chat to some of the guys in there and expose them to that world, to kind of say, well, it's not all it's not all how you know it. You know, there's another side to life, and doing things like that, because I just think, particularly in schools, they're talking about schools at the moment, and think some private schools where they're actually massively trying to go down that route of what they're seeing now is their students really struggling off the back of COVID. Again, COVID, use COVID in the same way that you use Henry's accident type thing. This sudden extreme event that everyone's had to deal with. Before that, a huge amount of the population had never dealt with anything really that severe. So a lot of people really struggled, understandably so. And what they're seeing in the kids now is kind of the manifestation of that. So what they want to do going forward is try and expose the students to different life scenarios and situations that other people are in the hope that it gives them that kind of level of perspective and understanding, so that when they come to deal with something, they're able to manage it slightly better. And I want, so with our kids, I definitely want to look at that. And then to your point of, you know, the competitive side of things like that, I'd probably do it more towards your way of thinking. Our kids are too, only because that's what I grew up with. You know, you know what you grew up with, right?
Exactly.
So I grew up in a family of 4 boys. So, you know, there was never, it's about taking part in anything, you know, whether it was table tennis, rugby, bloody whatever it was, there had to be a winner and there had to be a loser. So that's kind of what I've grown up with. And between our friends, you know, we're known as kind of the most competitive family in the world at everything. And that's what I grew up with. But equally, I suppose it's just trying to understand. It's not fair, and this is a real difficult thing at the moment, right? And you know, you go through it more than I am. Is actually there are a lot of, I think we've gone from a period where a lot of people thought very similar to a period of time now where everyone thinks differently, and everyone has a real diverse way of thinking about everything. So, and which is a really good thing, because out of that comes, you know, good things. But in terms of in the short term managing it, it's difficult, because it's, if you only thought a certain way, if someone comes up to you with a complete antithesis of your own opinion on something, it's very difficult to be able to sit there and take it on without going, and I'm terrible. That's one thing I'm really bad at. Like I can't let something lie if I'm, you know, but it also it makes these conversations more interesting.
And it's having this self-awareness, isn't it? Because that's where I'm saying, you know, obviously opinionated, we'll have our experiences, and it's one of the things I've really tried to do. I try to actually internalize more. I'm one of these people who talk about things. I mean, Ollie will tell you, I'll be like, I want to talk about it, and he's like, I thought we dealt with that, you know. So you know, women, so I'm trying to learn to sometimes go, don't sweat the small stuff, just internalize it. And if you've got an opinion, sometimes keep that opinion to yourself, or whatever it might be. And it can be quite a challenge. But going back to your point about, you know, Evie and, you know, your young one on the way at some point, you know, helping them, I guess, to understand what else is happening around them, that they have a privileged life. You know, we can't sit here and say we're not privileged because we are in a home. We look at what's happening in Ukraine, you look at what's happening just in general, the cost of living crisis, or all the things you mentioned, COVID, but you can't beat the experience, can you? Because you know, I always say to I mean, I will tell you all the time, if they complain about anything, I will literally go, well, you know, I didn't have a new pair of trainers or they'll complain about the car. I'm like, well, my parents didn't have a car. I had to get the bus everywhere, or cycle everywhere, or walk everywhere. Or they're complaining about flying on EasyJet when we go on holiday this week. Well, like, hang on a minute, I went on 1 holiday my whole life. You've been on 3 holidays already this year. You know, I grew up on a council estate, teenage mum, you know, had to, you know, fight for everything, and they're getting everything. So I have to try and sometimes make them experience the fight, if that makes sense, because I don't want them to sit there and think they can have what they want when they want it.
100%. Our dad takes the mick out of us for going to private school when he went to a grammar school. And we kind of say, well, it wasn't our decision, Dad. You're the one that sent us to the, you know, but the same sort of thing is kind of, but I think it's important, but it's and I'm saying all this now, you know, so Evie's 18 months old and my second kid isn't even born yet. So who knows what would end up happening. But the intention is definitely to do that, just because I just think you create a more rounded person. Now I'm 32, and to be honest, it's probably only the last 5 years that I've thought the way that I've thought about the world. And a huge part of that, and the biggest catalyst for that kind of change of thinking, was working in prisons. it's been one of the things that's impacted my life more than outside of obviously marriage, kids, and all the rest of it. It's probably the biggest thing, and Henry's accident is probably the biggest thing that's impacted my life, from that ability of going, Christ, I had no idea this world existed, that people actually go through what some of these people have been through, that actually, one lad we're talking to, his old man kicked him out of the house when he was 11, and he grew up in a car. He found a burnt-out car, grew up, so 11 years old, he's not gonna get a job, is he? So all he could do was steal to survive, and he's been in and out of jail since he was 15. He's now 50. And you look at that scenario and you go, well, no wonder. And these are the people that we very much talk about, the forgotten side of our society. They're behind a wall, kind of out of sight, out of mind. Where you go, well, these people are going to come out. The way our justice system works is the majority of people will come out at some point, and they're going to be living on your street. So would you rather than come out living on your street in the same mentality they went in with, or would you rather come out living on your street actually with a changed mindset and an intent and desire to want to contribute to the local community in whatever way that is? Now, of course, again, love the word caveat. Caveat with this, there are certain people we don't deal with in prisons for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
But we very much look at those people that are in there highly under environmental and circumstantial reasons. So obviously inevitably there's a lot of people involved in gangs and drugs and also a lot of people in there for things like drink driving. People don't understand there's a huge amount of the male prison populations and everything like drink driving, fights on a night out, all these sorts of things, that
stupid mistake that impacted the direction of their life. Yeah, this
is it. And things that we've all done. Well, I've never drink drive, I'll put that out there. But you get no. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I've never done that. Just to clarify, we can edit that bit out. Things like we've all done things that have probably put a bit, toe the line in our, whether when we were kids or an adult, wherever it is. Unfortunately, we've not been hampered by it. But for other people, they're not as, going back to your point of luck. This is not as lucky, in the wrong place, wrong time. So it's a really interesting one. I do think going forward, as going back to the original point, where I can, I'd love for my kids to have as many different experiences of other people's lives that they can, in the hope that actually when they grow up, they're well-rounded and all the rest of it.
The time for a coffee and some interesting facts about you, Will, if that's okay. We're going to ask us a couple of questions. Always like to start with favourite film.
So I was thinking about this, and it's quite difficult because I kind of have a lot of films that I would class, but one, I actually watched it years ago for the first time, but Shawshank Redemption, which is quite weird considering now that we're doing a lot of work in prisons as well, not helping people escape, but no, I watched it again fairly recently. My wife had never watched it. I said, right, we're sitting down and we're watching this film. And she loved it as well. But I don't know what it is about it. The story's great. Obviously, the actors in it are awesome. But I just loved it. I just came away just thinking, what an epic film.
It's a classic, isn't it? Actually, that's wonderful. I need to download some films for the plane, so I think that needs to be on my list, because I don't think I've watched it for at least 10 years.
And it's a long one as well, so it will take up a lot of time. There you go.
Especially as I'm on EasyJet, so
That's true.
So, favourite book? What have you been, or book that you've been reading lately that's sort of
so really I'd say the last book I read probably is now my favourite book. So it's a little plug. I mean, it's an old one. It's obviously backwards there, but Philosophy for Life and Other Dangerous Situations by Jules Evans. So Jules Evans actually got brought into the club when I was playing to talk to us as squad. So he's a philosopher himself and a student of philosophy, and amongst other things. And we set up at the club a philosophy club. So basically it'll be kind of one lunchtime or after training a month. And he came in to kind of kick it off, where basically we just chuck out kind of a life scenario situation, and essentially the boys would just discuss their thoughts on it, and and you learn a huge amount about people in those sessions, going to all the points we said in terms of the way people think about certain societal issues and all the rest of it. But this book is essentially going back and looking at all the ancient philosophers like Socrates, Aristotle, Plato, all these people, and actually looking at how instrumental their philosophies are now, and how they manifest themselves in, so he uses a great example of CBT, so cognitive behavioral therapy, is effectively Socrates. So it's everything Socrates spoke about in ancient Greece in terms of the ability to question your own thoughts, which then changes your emotions, which then changes your behaviors. So CBT is cognitive behavioral therapy. It's to change your behaviors through thought, through emotions, and all that sort of stuff, which is Socrates. So this ability or belief that we can change who we are and how we think through self-reflection, self-questioning, and all these things. And he's got loads of examples, and stuff around Plutarch and all these, and Epicurus and all these people. But it's brilliant. It's fascinating. So I never really knew a huge amount about ancient philosophies, so that was fascinating. And then as you're reading, it's one of those books where you go, actually, like, I've been in that situation where I thought that way, or if I thought that way, that would have really helped. And again, just from kind of a opening your mind point of view, it was awesome. Yeah, so that's a brilliant book.
And that's going to have to go on my reading list. I don't know about you, but one of the things I've probably, with age and obviously the way that you have to deal with relationships as you become older, or you become more senior, you become a parent, sort of reflect on my own behaviours. And one of the things that I've really tried to remember now is that 90% of life is created in your mind. So it's that whole thing of the narrative you tell yourself. And sometimes I really have to check myself and say, that's just what you're telling yourself. And often we'll go into a situation or scenario, we'll deal with a certain relationship because we have created that already in our mind. And it's really about that manifestation. I talked to my son, who's 12 actually. We were going off to a family, not wedding, as you've been away for recently, but it was a family birthday. And as with all big families, there's lots of different age children, there's different age people, and they made a comment beforehand about saying, well, what if we get left out? And I said, okay, if you go into that weekend thinking I'm going to get left out, or I'm not going to be with the older kids, or that will happen, because you will give out that vibe, and they will then not, or if you go into it, go, right, I'm going to have a great time, I'm just going to relax. So that's exactly what they did, and guess what, they had an amazing time. So yeah, it's just that whole thing of not sure if they get it right every time, as neither do I, but that manifestation and the whole mindset piece, isn't it?
As coaching, limiting beliefs, and this is it. And it's kind of, he talked a lot around Socrates. He used to kind of just go into the street and just strike a conversation with someone, find out what they thought, and then just basically question what they thought. So why do you think that? What experiences you had that makes you think that way? And what you often find is actually there's no real evidence to back up a lot of what we think. As you say, it's just kind of this thing we have in our mind. Maybe one thing has happened one time, and actually it goes quite nicely into one of the things Henry talks around. Henry talks around this whole thing of like, the reason our lives are so governed by when bad things happen is because bad things don't happen that often. So every day will be filled with positive. We'll have a nice meal, nice cup of tea, we'll have good conversations every single day. But because they happen so regularly, that becomes part of your normal life. That's expected. When something bad happens, because it's not very often, it kind of interjects and stops your life. And you're like, whoa. And that's why it then has such a big impact on us. It's like when going to holidays, you look for a hotel. If I find a hotel will have 9 brilliant reviews or have 1 really bad review, you won't book it because of that 1 bad review. Not the other 9 that actually say it's a really good place to stay. That's the way interesting your mind works. This whole thing of then questioning it. Going, okay, actually, is that the right thing to do when actually the evidence tells me this, or when actually my own experiences tell me that? So so even just even the fact that's drawn up this conversation is it's a good one to read.
Yeah, and actually, just quickly leading on to that, in terms of the team stuff that we spoke about earlier, I think it's having that team around you as well, or even if it's it could be Sean, it could be your wife, it could be your 100%. Your teammates. So basically saying, that's in your mind, or questioning, as you say, questioning what you're thinking. So, and that can be quite hard, because if you're quite strong-minded, as I'm sure we are, and we're determined and those things, and someone questions, our initial reaction can be one of being defensive about our position on it. And actually, I mean, sometimes I stop myself from being defensive. Other times I'll be defensive and reflect and think, actually, on reflection, maybe I could think a bit differently about that, or a bit, and I guess it's, again, just a journey through the mind, isn't it? And
this is it. And another book I've read, the one before this one, was No Rules by Reed Hastings. He's one of the co-founders of Netflix. It's kind of the growth of Netflix. And he talks a lot around a similar point in terms of Like someone has a new idea, they're not allowed to progress with that idea until they farmed for dissent. And they use the term farm for dissent. So this whole thing of actually go out and get people to question your idea, to question what you're thinking and what you're doing, because what will happen is they'll spot little holes that you didn't see that will then make the idea even better. And they'll also make you realize, actually, this is a non-starter, or I've absolutely nailed this. So by the time you do progress with it, you've kind of leapfrogged all those itty bitty conversations. And it's something that, I've spoken to the guys that I work with in 101st around this ability to not necessarily do it that formally, but if you have an idea or you're unsure of something, ask one of us. Ask one of us to try and find a flaw in it, try and find a hole in it, because actually in doing it, you make it stronger. Or you realise it's a non-starter, which then you save everyone a lot of time. Do you know what I mean? But it's just that whole mindset of, this encouragement of questioning what we're doing and not just going along with stuff because that's what we did before.
Yeah, and that takes bravery and courage, like we were saying earlier about owning up to mistakes. And I can think of times where you get that gut feeling, don't you, where someone questions, you're like, oh, but hang on a minute, but and it's trying to recognise that will happen. It's how you then deal with that and how you react. Because if you just respond defensively, then people won't give you their honest opinions.
Definitely,
and they'll just watch you fail.
And this is it. We always say to people, give me honest feedback about it. And when they do, it's then very difficult to actually take, because sometimes it's not what you want to hear. We had one recently actually with a client and a bit of feedback. And my initial reaction was exactly inside, I was just going like this. I was like, and I took it, and obviously we had a good conversation. It was great. And I rang Tommy, who works with me. I told him about it, and he did exactly this process and basically questioned, well, why do you think that? Like, what about this? What about that? And actually come out of that, and you go, okay, actually, no, that makes a lot of sense. And you just, it going back to our first conversation around the acceptance piece, it helps with all that as well. It helps you just get over that initial hurdle to then be able to kind of move on with stuff.
Yeah, to move on. So speaking of moving on, really want to know your interesting facts. So what's the one thing? So obviously we go Google you, you're on Wikipedia, we'll find out lots about you when you were born. But what do we not know about you? Is there an interesting fact you want to share?
I said this to you just before we came back on. It's not that interesting. So I used to play the drums as a kid, and I used to be in a band.
Cool. What sort of band?
Well, I was really into heavy metal as a kid. I actually still am, to be fair. I got quite an eclectic. I'm everything from like Take That through to Metallica, and everything in between. But no, so we were a bit of like a metal. We didn't really make our own songs. We just played other people's songs. But yeah, that's probly my.
But you hung up your drumsticks and went into rugby and put on your boots.
Unbelievable. Air drumming is my thing.
Thanks, Will. Enjoyed that coffee break. But just come back to the start. So we've spoken a bit about your journey, or a lot about your journey actually, and some of the work that you're doing with 101st, and the transition from rugby through to where you are now, and obviously plans that I'm sure you have for the future. Could you share with us some of the sort of key milestones of that journey and give us a bit more information about how you work with teams, individuals and businesses to really manifest what we've been speaking about today?
Yeah, of course. I suppose with the business I run now, I've almost got to go back to that initial bit when I finished to give the context behind what we do. So when I finished, because of the period of time I'd been involved with the club, say to a really successful period, because I've been there since kind of 14, boy and man, or man and boy. They gave the opportunity to start essentially kind of a consultancy business, which was called the Saracens Way, as you said at the start, which was basically looking at the success that we'd had on the pitch and how actually it wasn't predominantly driven by what happened on the pitch. It was predominantly driven by everything that happened off the pitch. So the rugby or the job was the byproduct of getting the right people in the right environment, the right purpose and the right values and all these sorts of communication patterns and all that sort of bit. And when you actually look at that, that's not specific to rugby, it's not specific to Saracens, it's not specific to sport. You can kind of lift that, repackage, reframe, reapply it anywhere. You just got to apply it in the given context of the people you're working with. So I got given the chance to start that, as I said at the beginning of the recording, to say I knew little about business when I finished playing rugby is an understatement. When I was playing, I was always quite good at, like, I did some work experience at law firm and other bits and bobs, so I did put myself out there. But, you know, when I finished playing, I thought that was still at 17.5%. And so I very quickly got that invoice sent back to me and saying you might want to check your numbers. I think one of the first sessions I set up, the events team at the club emailed me saying, do you want F&B for the event? Obviously food and beverage. Now I thought she meant Facebook. So I said, well, I've got a Facebook page for the Saracens away. She said, no. Do you want food and drinks? And I was like, okay, cool. So all those acronyms, but I still don't know what a lot of them are. But so I started up. So what was great about that was it was full in the deep end. So the first kind of 8 months of it was very much an experiment. It was kind of see if you can get something up and running. If you can, great. If you can't, you know, no harm, no foul. And very quickly, because at the time we were sat behind obviously a very strong brand and all the rest of it, it quickly kind of built up a bit of a pace. So I did everything. So I built it, I created it, I sold it, I marketed it, I delivered it, I did the whole shebang, which from a learning point of view was invaluable, because, you know, someone said to me at the start, you should get like an apprentice or someone to help you with all the admin side of it. And I said, well, I don't really want to, because if I do that, I'm not going to know what that part of the business is and how it runs. So I'd rather know it all, and then I can look at. So I did that part of the business for about 2.5 years, and it took off. It was flying. You know, I had some really big bits of work with clients, and it manifested itself initially from more of like a keynote thing into, as you know, with your previous employers came along to, you know, day workshops and time on the pitch. You bring some of the players along, and it really became quite a nice bit of work. And then the club kind of got embroiled in the salary cap scandal in January 2020. So building up to that point, I'd always had in my mind that the business was quite limited. So there's a very thick ceiling as to how far it could go, because it was so reliant on the brand and the lads still performing on the pitch. And if either one of those things kind of faltered directly, that would impact this business, because it's reliant on those things. So I always planned to grow a bigger business, of which this would be an element of it. So the idea was kind of there. That obviously then all came true when the salary cap stuff happened. So I think not even in a matter of days, I think it got announced in the morning. By that afternoon, we basically lost all our business for obvious reasons. So, you know,
and just on that, how did you lose? So what happened? Did you literally get messages saying, don't want to do it now? Yeah.
Phone calls, emails. To be fair to them, actually, most of them did ring me, because the issue wasn't, thankfully, it wasn't me or the program. It was the association, because of what we were talking about and the values of the club and these things. Obviously, then they go, well, that slightly contradicts what's happened. And for me, you know, there's nothing to, going back to the point of being defensive, I couldn't get defensive. There's nothing to come back to that with, other than I completely understand, you know, because it was clear as day what had happened very much.
So what were you feeling in that moment? What sort of feelings were going around your mind?
Yeah, I was livid. I was fuming, because not even from a business point of view, from a very personal point of view. And I said to Sean, and you talked to some of the other ex-players at the time, I know obviously it's all moved on now, so there's no point kind of hashing old wounds. But no, I was furious, because, you know, for me, what I finished playing, and I had the ability to look back and be really proud of what we did, and, you know, played in finals and won cups, and all that now was under the spotlight and being questioned. You know, how the validity of what I was a part of was being questioned. And I found that really tough, because I finished, and that was kind of my saving grace, that I could hold on to that, having finished playing way before I wanted to. So when that was in question, my own kind of, I suppose, identity in a way, it felt like that was, and it wasn't, again, going back to what we spoke about with the philosophy, my identity was not being questioned at all, but I felt like it was, because it was so directly connected to what was happening. So that all unfolded, and then obviously got compounded. So very quickly, kind of, I didn't really have a huge amount to do. So I did a lot more work with the foundation in the interim. We were trying to figure out essentially what a new role for me would look like in the club, or kind of like a hybrid role. And then COVID came along, so obviously we all got put on furlough. And when that happened, that was really this kind of like, I don't know, catalyst in my mind to go, right, I've now got an opportunity where I'm legally not allowed to do anything for the club. So I dive into my idea in my head. What would this bigger business look like? How would it operate? What would we be doing? And so really that period that furlough was probably one of the best things that happened to me from a work point of view, because it allowed me the time to formulate this idea and kind of make it real and put some meat on the bone. So, and in a weird way, I was probably the only person throughout those first couple of lockdowns who was quite happy if I got made redundant, because by a few months in, I was like, this is what I want to do. You know, this is so kind of August 31st, 2020 came about. I was made redundant, and September 1st, I launched 101st. So it all worked out quite well. So really 101st, what we do is very similar to what we did the Saracens way, but with the ability to actually genuinely grow and scale and be bespoke to our clients and what they need. So what we do, kind of the MO, is to use the power of incredible real life experiences to drive change. So the biggest learning I got from running the Saracens way was the power of storytelling, and how actually facilitating the right way of telling the right way. The learnings you can glean from other people's experiences are huge and actually can be used elsewhere. So this kind of fundamental belief that whether you're an extremely successful individual team organization, or you're an individual team organization that's been through change, been through adversity and come out the other side, the fundamental factors that allowed you to be successful, that gave that resilience, are actually the same, if not very, very similar. The only difference is the context in which we apply them. So what we do, using Henry as a great example, we do a lot of work with clients, again, around dealing with change. We don't call it resilience, we call kind of dealing with change, accepting change and building resilience, where Henry is kind of our story. So Henry comes in, tells his story. What we then do is go, Henry's story is amazing. We've got all the good inspiration, motivation from that. Let's now take Henry out of the story. Let's forget about the accident, purely at his mindset, at his language, the tools he used to get him through. They're the bits we're going to use. So let's reframe them, repackage and reapply them into your context to give you the same level of output and achievement in whatever it is you're trying to do. So that's kind of what we do. And through workshops, we've got an analytics platform that we can actually kind of track culture. There's loads of different ways, and I won't go into them because people can hopefully kind of look it up off the back of this. But it's been great, and there's 4 of us now. So it was myself and a guy called Tom Bednall, who was kind of from day one, who's been, without him joining me at the very start, we probably wouldn't still be going. So he's been awesome. But about a year in, we had this idea of going, what we do is great and we love it, but the end product is essentially organizational performance through the lens of people. We kind of frame ourselves as, we look at everything before the job. So I can never come into an organization and tell someone how to get to their job, because I've never done their job. I've never worked in their organization. What we can do is look at everything that comes before that. So how do you create a group of cohesive people that have common goals and shared values, that have a higher purpose to work towards? And if we do all those things, then indirectly people will become better at their jobs because they're more emotionally
connected. It goes back to what you said earlier, and I quoted you on success on the pitch is driven by what happens off the pitch. I guess you're bringing that to life, aren't you?
Exactly. And going back to all the stuff I learned from sport, and a lot of what we talk about is stuff that I was very fortunate to have experienced playing at Saracens in the time that I did. So about a year in, we had this thing. What we do is we of course we absolutely love it. It's our baby. But we were like, if we used our own, it's going back to the whole question yourself, if we used our own MO on ourselves and reframed and repackaged what we did and applied it elsewhere, this could be really genuinely impactful for someone's life. So that's where the foundation then comes in. So when I was working at the club had a program in Feltham Young Offenders Institute in West London that I ran a lot of there. So that was my first experience at prison, and that's where kind of my passion, if you like, for that side of life was sparked. So I always was biased towards wanting to get back involved then. And so we had this idea. A guy called Sam Clode, who was heading up the Saracens project at the time, had kind of handed his notice, and we were in a car park in the Mount prison, which is a prison in Hertfordshire. And I said, "Oh, Sam, I've got this idea, about starting this foundation. I don't really know what it looks like or how it operates, And he said, "Oh, it was funny you say that, because actually I was going to start my own charity, but you have, the structure, the brand and content, but boom, why not just come in and start the 101st Foundation?" So a 20-minute conversation car park has now turned into a foundation as we're going for a year that's had made like unbelievable impacts. We worked down H&P Portland, we're on the prison service spectrum and all this. So kind of all those experiences now. We've got businesses we're going for 2 years, the foundations we're going for a year. The two intertwine quite nicely. So obviously a lot of our guys that come out, it's all, you can run the best programs that you like in prison. If there's not a job or there's not opportunity when they come out, this bit's almost pointless. So a lot of our corporate clients have opportunities and roles that have low barrier to entries and they need work. They've got labour shortages. So we're going, well, we've got a group of people here are desperate to work, desperate for stability. You're desperate for labour. Why don't we so you end up working quite holistically with clients where you're looking after all their kind of corporate and that side of it. They then help us, and these guys recruitment. You then also tick their CSR boxes because they volunteer as mentors, and so you end up getting this quite nice holistic kind of way of working with some, not all clients obviously, because it's very dependent on what they do, but with particular clients you build up these really nice kind of relationships and way of working with them. So it's great, and I love it because it gives me, running a business and owning a business gives me the opportunity to actually do everything I talk about, and actually implement stuff that we talk to clients about, and my own beliefs and how I think a team should run. So my old man always says to me when they come down to see Evie, he says, do you actually ever work? Because whenever we come over, you always come down for a cup of tea. Because he's that old school kind of, generation of you're in work till 10 o'clock, you come home, you go back to work at 6. And I kind of said, well, yeah, of course I work. We're still alive. We're doing pretty well. So, but I said, the thing is, difference now is that I know how I work best. So for me to work best, I need the time with Sean and Evie. If I just went flat out all the time, I'd burn out. It's bad for me. It's bad.
Well,
for
you're
business.
also missing out on, I guess, everything you're doing it for. Miss out on the joy. Part of what we do is for our family, isn't it? So we don't get to enjoy
100%.
it with them.
100%. And also, it's not like, if someone wants to come along down the line and buy the business for multi-millions of pounds, obviously I'll have that conversation. But that's not why I've started the business.
Just saying.
Yeah. But that's not why, I've not, like a lot of businesses start with the intention of an exit, which is, it's absolutely fine. But that's not why I've done it. I've done it because this is something I enjoy doing and I'm passionate about doing it. It's the opportunity to actually create something that has an impact. You kind of leave a bit of a legacy and all the rest of it. So because of that, I don't, I can manage my time. And as long as I talk to Tommy, Sam, we've employed someone else into the foundation now called Jay, who's awesome. Little plug, we're actually putting a job ad out this week or next week for a marketing role for the business as well. So if anyone's interested, keep your eye out for that. But, very quickly you go from a team of 2 to a team of 5. And it's not, don't get me wrong, it's a tiny little team, of course it is. But even in that team, you've got people to manage and you've got to kind of instill your philosophy and understand what their philosophies are and try and amalgamate the two to create this environment that people actually genuinely care about and want to be a part of. And if they do, that takes time, but if they do, then the indirect byproduct is that they're going to work harder because they're bought into the purpose of the organisation. We're bought into each other and all those good things. So that's the bit that I get most excited about with the business, to be honest, is actually trying to ourselves create our own environments. If we do that, then naturally how we interact with clients and stakeholders is going to mimic what we already have, which is only going to be, theoretically, this is all theory, of course, but theoretically is only a good thing.
Yeah, well, it goes back to what you're saying about what happened with the Saracens way piece as well, isn't it? And that you've got to live and breathe, and otherwise it's just the integrity of your proposition just isn't there. So it starts with you and then obviously how you work with the businesses. And we spoke about culture, obviously, earlier in the conversation, but also we've sort of mentioned it there. Could you give us an example, almost like a case study, obviously not divulging any confidential information, but sort of case study where you've worked with a business and you've seen that sort of, as you say, change occur, and what maybe some of their aha moments or lessons have been through that period?
Yeah, sure. So what's really interesting for us is obviously year one, starting in COVID as well, was very kind of bitty and hand to mouth. So it's the odd kind of session here and there. So you're not necessarily creating change per se, but you're kind of igniting that way of thinking for them to run with. Whereas this year we've actually kind of, I call them actual bits of work. So, you know, so substantial. So we've won a multinational food retailer. We've signed so we're doing kind of a year-long program with them, where essentially it's running the same session but throughout the whole business. And that's really interesting, because what you find is, although the session's the same, obviously you're framing it around slightly different questions and issues dependent on the team or department or the area of the business that you're working in. But what always happens is, what you find is that everyone fundamentally has the same problems, because when you strip it back, every issue comes back to people. Yeah, unless it's a technical fault or a computer's crashed, every single problem anyone faces with comes back to a relationship somewhere down the funnel, which is great, because the problems are like this, the solutions are like that. You know, the bit you've actually got to fix is here. And if you get that bit right, then these things all start to kind of fall into play. So the way we kind of attack it a lot of the time is like, we need everything out on the table. Like, we can't goes back to the acceptance piece. So we can't actually create change if we don't know what each other think about this given situation. A lot of time people have never spoken to each other. So what you find is a lot of the kind of aha moments come when someone will say something, and someone that's worked with them every single day in the same team, not necessarily now to hybrid work, but used to sit next to him, goes, I had no idea that's what you thought about this. And you go, but you're working in the same team, trying to attempt to solve the same problems, and you're coming at it from diametrically opposite points of view without knowing that you are. So you can never fully kind of maximize your ability to work together, because you haven't had this fundamental conversation of actually, what do you think about this?
Well, it's like being on a pitch, isn't it, as a player, and not knowing each other's strengths, you know, what position you should be, and playing blind without numbers and just playing. Yeah, okay, you might walk your way through because you've got some, you know, decent rugby players on there, but you're never going to perform optimally. You're going to get in each other's way. You're going to, because you don't know each other's strengths and weaknesses. You don't know 100%. What position you play.
100%. And this is it. Going back to the stuff that, you know, the sport and then it's kind of going, well, once we have it open and you create that environment to do it, it's then going, so what do we do with that now? So it's then going, okay, so how do we now move forward with this? So that's kind of then where we use the stories and the experiences, because that gives the vehicle, so that gives them that thing to kind of hang their hat on, to say, well, this person did it and this is where it got them. Right, so now that's that inspiration piece. Now let's use that language, let's use those mindsets to take what we have and make it real and have an impact on whatever the framing issue or question is that we're looking at. So that's one thing from like a workshop point of view. We've, from the data side of it, so we're actually going through the report after this. This is my next call after this, actually. So we've just done a data capture on 11,000 teachers across the world for a private education provider. And that's very much looking at kind of the culture of the different geographies and different schools and different departments. And then what you do from that is it gives you the ability to hone in on a cohort. So, you know, let's say, for example, the higher level issue is they want to improve retention and obviously reduce attrition. What it gives you ability is to find out that this cohort actually don't feel like they get rewarded in the right way, don't feel like they have the trust of the managers, boom, boom, boom. Oh, and funny enough, that's also the majority of where the attrition is in that group of people. So now you know what one of the fundamental drivers is as to why people are leaving, so that you can kind of go in and, or what is the experiences you're having that's making you score these things the way you're scoring them, put the two together and go, okay, so mitigate that. This is what we look to do from a program of work point of view. And then we also have kind of one-on-one executive coaching offering as well, where we have kind of associate coaches, you know, obviously people like yourself, where when the client comes along, here are our coaches, and then we go from there. So it's kind of grown, I wouldn't say 2 arms and 2 legs. It's probably grown an arm and a leg each. This year, hopefully we grow the second leg and the second arm. But it's great. It's growing like, and it's again, I think because we, in kind of this consultancy world, I think we're quite niche and quite left field from the point of view that we're very honest. You know, and a lot of people are quite taken aback when I say I cannot make your team directly better at what they do. It's impossible because I've never done it. But what we can do is, and I think that's something that I was talking to Tommy, Sam and Jay in the foundation as well, and hopefully the new hire we get, that's who we are. You know, I almost don't like calling us management consultants because that comes with a certain connotation, a certain skepticism. And I don't think we are. I don't know what we'd fall under. We technically fall under that bracket, of course we do, but I don't think that's how we act and how we operate.
Performance consultants,
whatever it might be. I'm very happy for people to kind of figure that out. But it's but who we are is very upfront and honest, and even the analytics, actually, as much as it allows us to understand the clients better, which is the primary reason. What the kind of secondary is actually it measures us. Because if a client's tracking themselves over a year and we're working with them, what it tells them is whether or not our interventions are having any impact. And I think even kind of that ability to hold the mirror to yourself, I think is quite a refreshing thing in the space we work in.
I love the fact you've got the platform, because it's the data piece, because you're always going to have some people in the room that are saying, oh, why are we doing this? What's the benefit in this? But actually, having the data can be really powerful, not just for that group of people, but also when you're looking at measures of success, or you're looking at where they are on that journey, and be able to look back on some of those data points. Some people just speak to data, not the intangible. So it's just I love the fact that you've got that.
And it also goes to the point of narratives. People in businesses and leadership positions will tell themselves a narrative about a certain individual, certain teams, or why the business where it is. When you show them the data, actually very much is the opposite. And it gives them that ability to go, well, it's almost a bit like Moneyball. That was very close on my list of favourite film, Moneyball.
I don't think I've seen it.
Oh, you need to watch it. So it's basically baseball as a scout, and people scout on, oh, he's got a really nice looking swing, or he's grown up in this environment. Whereas this guy's going, no, I need to know how many times they hit the ball, how many bases they get on, how many. So it's all the data. It's the same sort of thing. People will kind of have a feel, which is great, and you do need that, but sometimes it has to be backed up by what's actually happening. And equally, but we have the data, and sometimes the data tells you a narrative that isn't true. So what we then do off the back of the data is we will then go and talk to the people and find, so you have the quantitative information. We then find the emotions and the experiences, which are the qualitative side of it, and then the work comes from meshing the two together. Okay, and they scored it this way because this is the experiences they're having, therefore we need to look at X, Y, and Z. And data's relative. It's all depends who's looking at it and all that kind of stuff. But it's extremely useful for us, and it's kind of proven to be a bit of a unicorn for us, really.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, thanks for taking us through that. I think we could talk about what you do with the business for so much longer. But I think what would be really good now is to go into some of those lessons that I'm sure you've learned through setting up the business. You spoke about it's growing one arm, one leg, and you've been building a business and that whole foundation piece. So would you be able to share for our listeners maybe one of the biggest lessons, or a number of the lessons that you've really had to learn as you got your business off the ground and to where it is now?
No, 100%. So I think it's kind of a common theme throughout our whole conversation, really. So I think it's just the ability to do something and learn from it. It seems my biggest learning is the ability to do something and learn from it. But I think it's the amount of times with the business where we had an idea, we gave it a crack. So for example, during COVID and obviously the subsequent lockdowns, no one could get together. So we started doing stuff virtually. Some of them went phenomenally. Some we didn't sell a single place for, and all these sorts of things. And just trying to kind of go along the lines of understand, well, why didn't it work, or why did it work, and actually going forward, is it feasible, is it not? And so we're kind of not using too many business crappy words, but like kind of streamlining what we do to a point. And the biggest thing I've taken from rugby that I've implemented was, and I've said this to Tommy, I say this to everyone, is when I was playing, the thing I wish I'd known as a young kid coming through was what I'm good at and what I'm bad at. So as a young kid, I tried to do everything, and invariably in trying to do everything, you do nothing. So you make a mistake and you try and make up for the mistake by doing something that actually isn't in your remit, and then you make another mistake, and I put until I was 24 or so, and I realised, right, what I do, how I add value to this team is I make a ton of tackles, I turn over the ball, and I stick my head in dark places. That's what the team needs from me. So if I've got the ball and Mako Vinopola's outside me, why the hell would I carry it when I'm probably going to get absolutely crunched, whereas he's going to run through and, so I'll get out and I'll support him. So that ability to how do I add value to the team and knowing what I do. So in the business is very similar, where at one point we started rattling off all these different ideas, and I had to take a step back and go, no, like this isn't, let's do what we do as best we can. How do we add value to clients? We add value to clients by doing X, Y, and Z. That's what we do. All the other stuff around it, and it's not a huge amount, you know, when you look at consulting services, it's very small. All the other stuff that we do is we find people that can do that better than us, and we form connections with them and we bring them into the fold. And this whole collaborative way of working, you know, at the club, we often spoke about collaboration over competition internally. So yes, there's competition for places, but at the end of the day, whoever gets that shirt needs the help of the other people in that position to best prepare them and all that kind of stuff. So we've kind of taken that with our clients. We don't really have competitors. We have people that do stuff better than us, so we'll bring them in with it. So we have a client, we work with them, and they go, we've got a huge IT issue. We go, cool, we don't have a clue how to deal with that, but one of our associates and one of our partners does. So let's bring them in. And so the learning is that ability to understand, well, what do we do well? How do we add value? Let's nail that. Once we've nailed that, we can then start to look at potentially other areas where we could dive into, or other sectors or other industries, or whatever it might be. So there's two there. So the first one is actually the ability to that kind of, again, that self-questioning and reflecting on what we're doing and how we're doing it. And then off the back of that is actually having absolute clarity in what we do and who we are. And off the back of that, then making sure that that's what we hone in on. And then until we do that, you know, not walking before you can run, all the cliches you want to put into it. But, you know, I think that's the biggest thing, especially with new businesses. I think it's very easy as a new business to get sucked into rabbit holes, and to suddenly see an opportunity that's slightly outside of what you originally set up to do, but it's quite lucrative. Like a short term, we could get a bit of money from doing that. But that's all it is short term. You get a bit of cash, and then what you do is you stretch yourself. And your own is only, you know, and then you fall outside of your capacity. And then what that does is actually scupper you for the whole reason why you set up the business in the first place. So, yeah, so I think they're probably the biggest things that I've learned.
Yeah, I think they're really good messages as well. And I can relate to that, having, you know, only recently really started my entrepreneurial journey. But I've seen it around me and certainly experienced it myself, where experimenting is good, you know, putting your head down the rabbit hole, at least to have a look and work out, is that somewhere I want to, you know, go down into or not? That's great. Or actually getting partway down and backing out. But it's when you're too far down, and as you say, it's then impacting other things. And I think, you know, what you speak about there, where you've tried things, some things have worked better than others, and over time you sort of funneled down or up, whichever way you look at it, in terms of, okay, these are where we're really going to focus. And I think, you know, a lot of people can probably relate to that. And even larger businesses, you know, even larger businesses can go through their phases where they're trying to do too many different things, or they're not clear on their proposition. But the quicker you can hone in, the better. And it sounds as though that's something that you guys have done.
Touching wood, yeah, in the process of doing, yeah.
In the process. Well, I've really enjoyed our conversation. We've got so much out there. I feel like we could have done several episodes of, you know, so much in there. But what we have got from today are just some really invaluable lessons in terms of, you know, how we accept and how we think about things. And I love that whole point around just positioning in the mind, you know, that narrative we create in our mind. Definitely going to go off and read the book that you've recommended as well, and look forward to speaking again soon and seeing where 101st goes in the future.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you for having me on. It's been great. I've loved it.
Thanks, Will.
Awesome. Thanks, Sam.